First there is only the cliff and the wind, a pale wall of limestone rising out of the torn earth like a blunt blade. Shell smoke hangs on the lip of the escarpment and drifts down in slow, gray veils. Somewhere above, a machine gun is stitching the horizon into a straight line of fear. The climb has already taken its toll boots slip on the cargo net, fingers burned raw on hemp, breath turned to chalk. Orders send the men up, and then another order sends them down again, because the top is a maze of fire and tunnels. Voices vanish into the rock. The ridge earns its name, Hacksaw, because every attack feels like a blade shaving away men you know. In this place, a single figure moves in the wrong direction. When the companies break and slide back over the edge, he stays. When bursts rake the bluff, he crouches among the torn bodies and does what his hands were trained to do. No weapon, no sidearm tucked away in a pocket, just in case. Only a pouch of bandages, powder to fight infection, morphine syrettes, a coil of rope, and the stubborn idea that a man's duty can be to heal rather than to kill. He wraps a bandage tight around an artery that is trying to write the last sentence of a life. He presses a dressing into a wound, murmurs something that the wind takes, and then drags the weight of a full-grown man to the cliff's edge. There is no system waiting at the top, no stretcher party ready at the bottom, just this cliff, this rope, and a prayer that has become a rhythm. He ties a sling into the rope the way he practiced, lays the wounded soldier into it, and leans back over the void, lowering slowly, palms burning, boots sliding, breath counting off the inches. The rope hums against stone. Somewhere below, voices shout and hands reach up. The man he just wrapped disappears into a world that still has a chance, and the medic goes back into the gun smoke to find the next heartbeat. "Lord," he whispers, "help me get one more." It is not cinematic. It is not meant to be heard by anyone but the God he believes in. But it becomes a kind of march cadence to his night, a line he repeats until it is the only thing in his head besides blood types and airway checks. He will say it over and over on top of this ridge in Okinawa, and men who had mocked him in training will speak his name like a spell when they feel hands on their shoulders in the dark. This is the story of the medic who saved hundreds with no weapon. His name is Desmond Thomas Doss, a quiet Seventh-day Adventist from Virginia who refused to carry a rifle and yet walked into the hottest corners of the Second World War with more courage than most men can imagine. If the war had been a matter of machines alone, the tanks, the bombers, the guns that talk faster than thought, it might have ground on without him. But war is fought by human beings, and sometimes one person's refusal to be what the world expects bends the path of the day, then a campaign, then a memory that outlives all of it. To understand how a man like Doss came to this cliff, we have to listen for the quieter sounds beneath the artillery, the cotton tier of a field dressing pulled free, the glass clink of a plasma bottle hanging from the butt of a rifle turned into an impromptu stand, the soft syllables of someone saying, "You're okay, while believing neither word. We have to look at a battlefield not as a chessboard of arrows and units, but as a place where a medic knows the map of pain better than any general. Okinawa, spring 1945, the last stepping stone before Japan, and the most terrible. The island is a fortress of caves, reverse slopes, camouflaged firing points, and a foe who means to make the cost so high that the Allies will doubt the wisdom of the final step. The escarpment the Americans call Hacksaw is one scarp among many along the Ridge, a sheer face at one sector, and then gentler, but always guarded by trenches dug into coral and tunnels bored into stone. The 77th Infantry Division, the Statue of Liberty boys, climb it again and again. They carry more ammunition than some of them think they can bear, and still, it is never enough. They carry fear like another pack on their backs, and still they climb. Among them, the medic with no weapon. He is not a symbol in his own mind. He is a private first class with a job and a faith. He has already gone to ground under mortar showers in Guam. He has crawled through muddy rice fields on Leyte, tugging litters through water that smelled of rot and gunpowder. He knows how to find a pulse in dim light, how to weigh the math of triage when there are too many needs and not enough hands, how to move a man whose breath is a thread without snapping it. He has been the subject of jokes that were not jokes in training. He has been called a coward to his face by men who will later hold him as if he were their brother. His own officers have tried to force a weapon into his hands. His own comrades have tried to make him quit. Yet here he is, at the top of a cliff, lowering one more man into the dark, while death looks on from 30 yards away with a barrel and a scope. If you grew up with stories of war, told in sharp bursts assaults, counterattacks, the clean geometry of tactics, you might not know the way a medic's day actually passes. It is a blur of kneeling and reaching while the ground throws itself up around you, of pressing your body into the earth while you count to 5 and then run, of learning voices the way you once learned the call of birds in your backyard. This one is calm. This one is lying. This one is beyond help. This one is trying to be brave for you. It is choosing who to treat first when 2 men call your name at once. It is speaking to a stranger with a gentleness you did not know you had, because in battle, the familiar rules fall away and you learn how much power there is in tone and touch. So the hook is not the cliff itself, however cinematic its edge may be. The hook is the idea that a man can look at a war like this and decide that his role is not to add another bullet to the air, but to subtract suffering from it, one stolen body at a time. We remember Desmond because he made that decision, and then proved that courage without violence is not a contradiction, but a different kind of ferocity. On the morning that the battalion will try again for the top, an officer who once sneered at the medic's faith finds himself waiting. The story will be told later, with edges polished by memory, that the attack won't start until the medic finishes his prayer. Whether or not the clock obeyed his devotion, the men did. They waited, not because their orders said so, but because something had shifted. The unarmed man had become the one they trusted most. That is a rare transformation in the short, brutal curriculum of war. By the end of this story, you will know how a boy from Lynchburg learned to see a rifle as a line he would not cross, how he endured the small cruelties of his own side to wear the Red Cross armband, how he carried men off a ridge by the dozens while artillery grumbled and machine guns asked their grim questions, and how he crawled through the last weeks of his war with his own blood on his trousers, still stopping for anyone who whispered his name. You will also know what it cost him, and what it gave us to remember, because history is not only the count of victories and losses, but the moments when someone reaches for a different measure. On the ground, the rope slides through his hands again, and the edge of the ridge bites at his boots. There is a face in the sling below, pale and turned toward the stars. "Just one more," he says, and the night answers with the old language of shells. The medic leans back into the dark. Before the ridge, there is a boy in Virginia staring at a picture in a family Bible. The scene is simple. Cain stands over Abel with a club in his hands, and the verse says plainly, what the commandment later will: thou shalt not kill. In Lynchburg, where the hills roll soft and the factories hum, that picture marks something in the boy that does not move when the world pushes at it. Desmond Doss is small, wiry, the kind of child who would rather climb than run, who learns early that strength is not the same as loudness. The Doss household is complicated. His father, a World War I veteran, carries spirits in bottles and memories that don't come out in daylight. His mother is a Seventh-day Adventist whose faith folds Saturday into a quiet circle, and whose kitchen teaches that food can be made without meat. In that house, Sabbath is a refuge and a discipline, and mercy is not an abstract word. The 10 Commandments hang near the door. Desmond takes them as if they were laws, etched not only in stone, but in his own bones. When war comes, it rips open those quiet rooms like a letter that can't be unopened. Pearl Harbor throws the country into a stride it had kept in the closet since the last war enlistment lines. Factory shifts that scrape the bottom of fatigue, trains like arteries, carrying men to where their lives will change. Desmond enlists in 1942 because he believes he cannot stand aside while others go, but he does so on terms that make him a stranger in his own uniform. He will not carry a weapon. He will not kill. The Army is a machine for making sameness out of raw material. It does not enjoy exceptions. At Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where red dirt stains socks and boots in equal measure, the company learns that one of their own refuses rifle drill. Conscientious Objector is the official phrase written into the law for men whose faith forbids them from killing. But to his platoon, the term sounds like a silk handkerchief in a toolbox. He is mocked the jokes are the easy part. He is also assaulted in ways that do not leave paperwork behind. His bunk is tipped, his chores doubled, his Sabbath ridiculed. An officer, Captain Jack Glover, looks him in the eye and asks why he won't just go home. The Army tries to court-martial him for disobeying an order when he won't pick up a rifle. He stands on his rights. A clause in the Selective Service Act permits service without bearing arms, and a division chaplain, Colonel Hamilton, quietly makes sure the hammer misses him. Doss is stubborn in a way that does not raise his voice. He accepts fatigue details without complaint. He runs until his lungs taste of iron and then runs more. On the obstacle course, he is not flashy, but he is relentless. He is made a medic not because anyone in authority admires his faith, but because the compromise solves a problem. A man who won't carry a rifle can carry bandages. What the Army does not yet know is that this compromise will give them a soldier who will cross spaces armed men cannot. That unarmed is not the same thing as helpless. Medical training is a different kind of thoroughness. He learns how to stop a hemorrhage when a man is bleeding faster than you can think. The difference between arterial and venous blood at a glance. The right pressure for a tourniquet when the old advice has already been rewritten by experience. How to push sulfa powder into a wound even as a patient flinches. How to set an airway with 2 fingers and a thumb. How to hang a plasma bottle from whatever is available when trees and poles are luxuries. He learns to recognize shock by the feel of a wrist and the look of a mouth. He learns that sometimes the only painkiller is a hand. His faith travels with him to the barracks and the field. He keeps the Sabbath when training allows, and when it doesn't, he works only to heal. He will not carry a weapon, but he will carry other men's fear as if it were another bag. The Seventh-day Adventist habit of vegetarian meals makes him a curiosity in mess halls, where meat is the measure of a cook's pride. He carries a pocket Bible, a gift from Dorothy Scott, The young nurse he marries in 1942 delicate, strong, with a laugh that steadies him. Her photograph, tucked into the pages, smiles with a kind of stubborn joy that matches his own. When the 77th Infantry Division ships west into the long water and endless sky of the Pacific, Das goes with him. Guam, July 1944. A green island that smells like sugar and death, where the jungle tries to rewind every day's violence into vines and silence. The division fights through high grass and tangled trees, inching along ridges and across fields that are watched by patient eyes. Das begins his quiet ledger here. He moves under fire to men who wail for their mothers and for morphine. He learns how heavy a man is when both of you are afraid. He keeps moving even after he realizes the enemy is firing at him, because he is the one who moves when others hide. Leyte, October 1944. Rice paddies that turn to mirrors of sky when the rain comes, and mountains that boil with fog. Here he perfects the art of being a shadow. He learns the angles of approach that keep him alive approaching, a casualty from the low side of a berm, never silhouetting against a bright patch of field. He crawls for hours through mud that steals boots and hope, carrying plasma wrapped against the weather. His hands always warm, even when the rest of him is soaked to the bone, because fingers that lose feeling make mistakes. He wins the Bronze Star for Valor twice on this island, not because medals found him, but because his officers cannot ignore what men keep telling them. The unarmed medic keeps going farther than prudence says he should. In these months, the company's regard for him shifts like the light at dusk slowly and all at once. The men who mocked his vegetarian meals begin to pass him their meat and guard his rest. The captain who pushed at his conscience learns that this private will be the last man off any field and the first man to move toward the worst sound. Disdain turns to a kind of prickly respect, then to reliance, and finally to something like reverence, whispered only in places without witnesses. They can joke about him again, but it is a different kind of joke now, the way men tease a friend to hide the fact that they are grateful. There are boundaries he will not cross. He will not work on Sabbath for anything but healing. When Saturday comes and the unit is in reserve, he reads his Bible under a tree and lets the world slow. When the unit is in action, he works without complaint, because saving life is, to him, the purest way to honor a day set aside for God. This distinction confuses some, enrages others, and finally becomes just another fact of how their company functions. If they go over the top on a Saturday, they know where he will be carrying dressings, whispering, "You're okay," tying knots that will hold when a cliff pulls at them. By the time the 77th sails north for Okinawa, the war has carved away the boyishness in his face. He is still slight and still quieter than most, but there is a steadiness in him that draws eyes when bullets go by. He has learned that courage is not an emotion but a habit, built in small daily acts of moving one foot and then the other toward where the need is. He has also learned that the enemy is human. He has wrapped field dressings around bodies whose uniforms are not his own. He has watched men die and kept his hands soft enough to close their eyes. There is irony in how the army prepares him for the island that will define his legend. The drills, the scorn that hardened him without making him bitter, the long days of hauling litters, and the longer nights of regret when he could not save someone all of it, sharpens his ability to survive what comes next. The Leyte escarpment does not care about arguments made in barracks. It does not care about Sabbath or sarcasm. It cares about angles and courage and whether your hands are steady when you lean back over the abyss. Up there, the only credentials that matter are the ones written in breath and blood. When the landing craft slides up onto Hagushi beaches and the ramps clatter down, the island looks almost calm. Low hills, fields that could be farms, villages crouching under trees. But the veterans know that beauty lies in ambush here. They also know something else now, something they would not have guessed a year earlier, that the man with the red cross on his sleeve, who won't even touch a rifle, may be the reason they see home again. Okinawa turns familiar words into questions. The maps call the Meta Ridge an escarpment, as if a polite term could soften its edge. The men call it Hacksaw, because nothing smooth or precise survives more than a few minutes up there. The face at their sector rises almost sheer for the first pitch dozens of feet of rock that take a cargo net, splayed like a ladder into vacancy. Above, the ground flattens only long enough to lull you. Then it rises again into cut trenches, bunkers masked by brush, and caves that open and shut like mouths. Japanese doctrine on Okinawa is patient and layered. Instead of throwing bodies at the beaches, they have dug into the island's bones. They build reverse slope positions, so the first crest you take buys you gravity but not safety. They sight machine guns to cross their fire, to stitch the gaps between boulders and fallen trees. They keep mortar ready to sprinkle the ground with fragments at moments chosen to be cruel. They let you climb, and then they make you pay for imagining that up is the same as through. The 307th Infantry Regiment of the 77th Division brings the cargo net to the cliff early in the assault. The net hangs like a promise of return, but becomes an umbilical line that carries men up into a different weather wine that smells of cordite and limestone. Air as thin with breath as with safety. They climb into the ridgeline's teeth, push forward through the scrub and the clefts, and then they meet the invisible geometry of a defense designed to harvest momentum. The first attacks achieve surprise, and then are blunted. The companies are forced back down, some men sliding, some carried, some not moving at all. On one of those days and early, May the medic with no weapon finds himself among the men at the top when the order comes to retreat. The weight of the air shifts. It is in small sounds, the silence after a whistle, the grunt that escapes someone when his foot hits the net and finds emptiness under the next rung. Das looks across the flat ground, through the smoke, and sees forms that will not join the retreat. Some are beyond help. Some are still breathing, their hands lifting and falling like weeds in a current. He makes his decision without drama. He stays. The method he uses is as important as his will. He moves low, always, because even a medic is a target. The brassard on his sleeve means nothing to an enemy who has seen what medics do for momentum. He approaches casualties from cover, crawls the last yards, and speaks to them. He checks for an exit wound. He sprinkles sulfa to stave off the infection that grows in tropical heat as if it were a crop. He cinches a field dressing, and then, when needed, binds with a tourniquet he will monitor instead of forgetting. A turn too far means a limb will die. A turn too few means the man will. He pushes a morphine syringe into a thigh and keeps the spent tube as a grim little record, so no one doses the same soldier twice by accident. He improvises, uses a helmet as a pillow, a rifle to support a broken ankle, a canteen strap as a sling. Then he drags or carries. The art of moving a wounded man under fire is part strength, part angle, part prayer. He uses the fireman's carry when legs will not obey. He uses the cradle drag when a man's head needs to stay low, his own body the shield that takes splinters and grit. Sometimes he uses a blanket when there is time to make a litter, folding and knotting corners in motions he could do blind. He has learned to make his back strong and his feet cunning, to step where rocks will hold and not roll, to read ground the way another man reads faces. At the cliff, he ties his rope into a sling he can make by feel. The knot is simple enough to trust in the dark, and precise enough to hold a full-grown man who twists and moans. He braces, plants, and leans back against the void. The rope sings against the edge as it pays out. He lowers his patient hand over hand, paying attention to his breath, because breath is a clock when there is no other. Below, men in his company barely believe what they are seeing. The wounded arriving from the sky like a rough blessing. They move from one dropped body to the next, cut the sling, grab the rope, and shout for Doc, without knowing whether he can hear them. He can. He hauls the rope up, hand over hand, feels the fibers cut into his palms, stands, sways, and goes back. The prayer is not a speech. It is a beat that keeps his mind from bleeding into the ground the way his strength is. Help me get one more. Some he can reach. Some he has to leave, marking their position in his head to return when the dark gives him a blindfold sturdy enough to risk more. Twice he dashes forward into a zone so hot that tracers feel like wasps, pulls a man, and rolls with him until they hit a shallow fold that stops bullets the way a whisper stops a scream. A pattern emerges that night. Japanese soldiers learn that someone is stealing the wounded and study the ground to catch him. Das learns their habits and adjusts waiting long seconds when he would rather run, then moving in the lull between bursts when a machine gun pauses to change a barrel or a loader reaches for a belt. He eavesdrops on the rhythm of war until it gives him the seconds he needs. He treats an enemy soldier, binds a wound, offers water, because his oath does not include uniforms. In the dark, humans are weight and breath before they are flags. The number will matter later, because humans like numbers to hold their amazement. Das himself will argue the countdown, a humility that is also an exactness. The army will settle on 75 rescued from the top of the ridge that night and in the days around it. One by one, lowered over a cliff on a rope, dressed and soothed and saved by a man who would not save himself the trouble of carrying a weapon. The exact count is secondary to the lived fact on the ground that dozens felt hands on them in a place where they had expected to die alone. Before dawn, his arms are jelly. His legs refuse complexity. His eyes sting with sweat and dust. He tastes blood that is not his and cannot waste time figuring out whose it is. He keeps going until the sky admits there is a morning. Then, while others slouch against rocks and count their fingers and thank whatever they believe in for being alive, he sleeps for an hour with his head on his own arms, the rope coiled around his boot out of some stubborn instinct to be ready. The attacks continue in days that feel like duplicates of the worst parts of memory. The climb, the push, the search for angles where fire cannot follow, the sudden quiet that presages something worse. He is everywhere someone shouts, "Medic," and nowhere the enemy expects a man to appear, because there is no sense in what he does, except the kind that resists words. He drags a man out of a crater while grenades bounce in and out of it, pulls two to the lip, and then dives back when a third voice reaches him from the bottom. He brings a telephone wireman in by running his hand along a cable until it leads him to a body. He finds a sergeant who has been the fulcrum of a squad's anger at him months earlier, and carries him on his back as if the world had always been like this one human on another's shoulders, because that is how you move things that matter. The ridge widens, then narrows again. The wind changes. The smell of earth and explosives becomes ordinary, which is a horror all its own. He never raises a weapon against the men shooting at him. He raises only his hands. And yet, in the eyes of the enemy, he is as dangerous as any man up there, because he undoes their calculation. Their bullets are supposed to remove men from the field. His rope and bandage return them to the fight, or at least to life. He is a counter-argument to a doctrine written in fire, and that is a threat more profound than any bullet. The ridge does not relent. Battles are not one scene, no matter how movies would have it. They are repetition with variation hours, composed of the same notes rearranged into new patterns of danger. After the night of the rope, there are more days when the line rises to the top, takes ground the enemy had not planned to cede, and then must hold it against a counterattack that swells out of trenches and mouths of caves like a sickness returning. Das is a metronome in this chaos. His rhythm is simple. Toward the cry, down to his knees, hands to the task, then drag, then lower, then return. On May 21st, he is already worn to the bone. He moves toward a man who has fallen in the open, and the open answers him. A grenade detonates near his feet and tears into his legs. The immediate instinct is to curl around the pain, to claw at your own calves, to scream. He does something else. He goes still. Not surrender, not shock discipline. He studies his own blood, his own wounds, the way a medic studies anyone's. He binds himself where it matters, tight and efficient, stops the leakage of life with the same measured care he gives another man. Then he waits, not because he wants to, but because moving is more dangerous than the seconds it will take for someone to notice him. He spends 5 hours on the ground in the enemy's country of sight and sound, saving what strength he has, for moving can be a solution rather than a gesture. When litter bearers finally reach him, he lets relief loosen nothing on his face. He is Desmond Doss. He does not boast to his own blood that it runs true. They lift him, step off, and then he sees what is about to be lost, a soldier nearby, more badly wounded, unattended. He orders the litter bearers to put him down. They protest. He insists. The calculus is cruel but clear. The stretcher, like every resource in war, must go where it will do the most. He rolls himself off and tells them to take the other man. He will crawl. He begins the crawl toward the rear lines, his legs heavy as sacks now, tearing at the ground with his hands. It would be drama enough if this were the end of it. A medic wounded, sacrificing his own ease for another, moving inch by inch toward safety. But the ridge is not finished with him. A sniper, watching through glass that turns the world into numbers, fires. The bullet strikes his left arm, shattering bone and undoing sinew the way a hammer undoes a glass. The pain is an animal with teeth. He grits his own. Once again, the medic treats the only casualty at hand, himself. There is a broken rifle near him, stock intact. He refuses weapons, yes, but he is a practical man. Wood is wood when a splint is needed. He breaks the stock free, binds it to his arm with bandages and what remains of his shirt, creating a grotesque brace that turns the wild angle into a straight line again. The act is not a betrayal of his refusal. It is an extension of it. He will not use a rifle to harm, but if it can return a medic to his duties, or at least to life, then it is a tool like any other. He crawls again 300 yards, by some accounts over ground that, even without bullets, would object to such treatment. He arrives at an aid station more exhausted than he has been in all his days. In the confusion of evacuation litters, groans, the flapping canvas arithmetic of a tent city that exists solely to deny death its easy harvest, his Bible goes missing. It is a small book, cloth-bound, with a woman's handwriting in the front. In that moment, for the first time in a long time, he feels panic for something that is his alone. He does not call men off triage to look for it. He does not make a fuss. But word runs along the lines like a current. Men who have been carried because of his hands move back up onto the ridge and search for that book between casualties, after attacks, in the dead times that are never truly dead. They find it and return it to him. It is an unmilitary act of loyalty, proof that respect has turned into something deeper. He spends days in surgeries and convalescence. The war continues without him, as wars always do. The ridge will be taken and retaken, lines drawn and rubbed out, villages burned and rebuilt in the arithmetic of shells. He trains his patience as hard as he ever trained his legs. He is hearing things now that no one else hears. The price of grenades and gunfire rattles the small bones in his ears. Later, infection will chase him, a shadow that tallies the cost of tropical battlefields for years. For now, he faces a quiet that feels like betrayal. When the fighting moves on, and the division turns its face toward the next task, the medic who saved dozens by rope and by grit is flown away to a hospital. In October 1945, he stands in a different kind of formation. The White House has rooms that echo with history, scene by scene. President Harry S. Truman is a compact man with eyes that can be merry and cold, sometimes in the same minute. He has signed papers that killed many. He has also written letters to grieving mothers with his own hand. He pins the Medal of Honor around the neck of Private First Class Desmond T. Doss. The citation is longer than most, because the axe it tries to capture will not compress easily. The night on the escarpment, the craters, the wounded lowering like a rosary of bodies, the refusal to be carried while another needed the litter, the crawl with a broken arm lashed to a rifle butt. Truman shakes his hand and says, "I'm proud of you. You really deserve it." The President of the United States, who will later say something like, "You are the bravest man I ever met," means it. Back in the unit, the story spreads. Men in other regiments speak of that medic with the tone soldiers reserve for the small number of events that make them reconsider what is possible. Officers are more matter-of-fact in official reports, but when they are off the record, they are generous with their all. The Army, which once tried to break him of his stubbornness, now points to him as proof that character can make a problem into a resource. For a brief time, the newspapers find him. He is as uncomfortable with the attention as he is adept at moving silently through a firefight. There are other medics on Okinawa and in the Pacific and in Europe whose names we do not remember. Men with armbands from many nations who crawled into places where policy had become personal pain. In telling Doss's story, we tell theirs too, or at least we nod in their direction and promise not to forget, because otherwise the spotlight is a theft. But Doss is singular in some ways. He did it without the reassurance of a weapon on his hip. He did it while carrying a faith that made his choices harder and also steadier. He did it after being mocked by those he saved, which should give anyone who thinks they know what they will do in a crisis a moment to think. The war ends, not with the parade on the ridge, but with signatures in another room in another country. Men go home changed in ways they admit and in ways they can't find words for. Desmond brings home more than most: scars that itch in the rain, a cough that will prove to be a messenger from deeper trouble, and a sense that he must disappear into the quiet he once left. He does not become a professional speaker or a regular guest at ceremonies. He returns to Dorothy and to a life where a good day might be a meal cooked just so, or an afternoon where the sound of wind in the trees is just that wine, not incoming. Healing is not a thing that happens once. For Desmond Doss, it is a second calling after the first. The tuberculosis that hid in him after wet foxholes and long nights with breath-held breaks cover in the late 1940s. Surgeries follow, ribs removed, a lung sacrificed to the old enemy that once fell to sulfa and morphine in others. He loses weight. He loses days to hospital light that never dims enough to forget the hour. Later, decades later, a new medicine meant to steady his fragile health steals most of his hearing. The irony is as bitter as it is simple. The man who listened so hard for the small sounds of life on battlefields now carries silence like another burden. A cochlear implant will give him some of the world back, but not the full orchestra, only a few instruments at a time. He and Dorothy endure these years with the same stubborn tenderness that saw them through long separations and worried letters. There are ordinary quarrels, ordinary joys, and a constant layer of the not ordinary underneath memories that visit uninvited, aches that speak in old riddles. At church, he sits in the same pew, unremarkable except for those who recognize what the lines on his face mean. In kitchens and living rooms across America, a few veterans lift their coffee cups when his name comes up, eyes going soft for a second. Most of the country does not know him. That is not an indictment of the country. It is a mark of how many quiet salvations are folded into the larger story of a war, how often the bravest men insist on returning to anonymity as if that were the final labor asked of them. He is not entirely left to quiet. Invitations arrive, the Medal of Honor Society gatherings, the occasional interview. He does not court them, but sometimes he says yes, and when he speaks, he is plain. He says he simply did what any decent person would have done, which is untrue in the literal way and true in the moral one. He insists on pulling the extraordinary back into the realm of the expected so that others might feel permitted to do good. He does not chide those who carried rifles. He does not make sermons out of the cliff. He believes in a God who asks for conscience, and he speaks of that conscience the way another man might speak of his right hand, something that is part of him, not a trophy. Men he saved bring their children to meet him. Middle-aged faces that once were young and bleeding reach for him with awkward handshakes and phrases that come out too fast. They want to say thank you without sounding small. He makes it easy. He listens when he can, and he squeezes their fingers. And sometimes he says their names if they can supply the day, the place, the detail that triggers the elaborate card catalog of his mind. He remembers a scar on a calf, a laugh barked under fire, a song someone hummed without knowing it while being carried down a slope. These are the ties that bind him to a generation. These are also the strands that anchor him to a society that often forgets the cost of its calm. If you stand a while in front of the case that holds his Medal of Honor in a museum, you will see a small bag beside it. Not a glamorous artifact, canvas, faded, stained, the medic's kit that is a mirror of the man, simple, functional, stubborn. Inside once, there were Carlisle dressings, a tourniquet, sulfa, morphine, bandage scissors, tape, gauze, safety pins, a stethoscope that picked up the weak drumming of a heart where mouths were telling lies of bravery, and a razor that shaved skin for adhesive in rain and sweat. Tools as humble as a carpenter's, but for wood that breathes and bleeds. The larger history circles around this small story like a moth around a lamp. Okinawa was the last great ground battle in the Pacific, a place where soldiers and Marines and sailors learned new definitions for courage and loss. Civilians suffered in numbers that defy comfort. The island is not a symbol to those who live there. It is a home that remembers. Doss's rope makes a difference on one face of one ridge in one sector of that battle. The scale of war can make such acts feel like drops in an ocean. But oceans, we should remember, are made of drops. It is tempting to polish the edges of his story into something soothing, that goodness simply wins when it is brave enough. That is not what happened. Goodness had to crawl through shrapnel and scream and make bargains with time and pain. It did not always win. Sometimes it chose between losses. The gift of Doss's life is not that it saves us from the truth of war, but that it gives us a way to look at that truth without despair. He did not make war better. He made a few square yards of it less cruel, again and again, until those yards added up to a life that proved something stubborn about human beings. That even when organized violence tries to make a desert out of a heart, some people will plant there anyway. And the title we have given him, the medic who saved hundreds with no weapon, is both precise and an invitation. Others in other armies did the same work with courage that matches his. Some carried pistols they never fired. Some carried nothing but their hands and their will, like him. On the Eastern Front, in the deserts of North Africa, in the villages of Italy and France, in the jungles of Burma and New Guinea, medics and stretcher-bearers made a practice out of stepping into places designed to kill them. To tell Doss's story well is to nod to the red crosses and crescents on sleeves everywhere, the bandages that matched the cloth wrapped around burned cheeks in London, and the potions that boiled on stoves in Manila when hospitals ran on candles. It is to widen the circle of admiration until the quiet work of saving life under fire is no longer an exception in our memory. What do we do with such a story now, in a time when the sound of war is different, but its effects are the same? We can start with the small imitations that pay real homage. Learn the basics of first aid. Carry a kit in your car that holds the means to stop a bleeding stranger on a roadside. Refuse to be one of the people who stand and watch a crisis as if it were theater. We can look for the person in our daily battles who is doing the unarmed work, kindness at a cost, patience beyond reason, and we can back them. Carry their belts if they are metaphoric, and their burdens if they are heavy. We can ask harder questions about what bravery looks like, and we can award our own small medals to those who do not fit the old silhouette of heroism. Desmond Doss died in 2006, an old man by the arithmetic of his generation, in a small town in Alabama with family around him and the quiet he had earned. The rope hangs in a museum now, and the cliff is a tourist photograph in some albums. The war has shrunk in memory, the way all wars do, to headlines and dates and a few faces. But somewhere, there is a man who wakes at night because he remembers the sensation of being lowered, the rock passing by, the rope biting his back, the hum of friction, and the words, "You're okay. I've got you." Somewhere there is a child who has met the old man who saved his father, who has shaken a hand that once trembled with fatigue over a cliff in Okinawa, and who now understands something inarticulate but permanent about the world. If there is a call to action here, it is a soft one, spoken in the same tone that medic used on the ridge. Be the kind of person who moves toward need. Trust that conscience is not a weakness, but a way through. Measure courage not only by what danger you face, but by what harm you refuse to do. The wind still blows across Meta Ridge. If you listen carefully, beneath the echoes of gunfire that linger in the rock, you might hear a whisper riding the air even now. Just one more.